Hello and welcome to another post-game edition of the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder, doing the same at The Athletic. And I think that we have some context to Penn State's win over UCLA today, beating them 27-11. That will probably make some Penn State fans a little more grateful.
John, I feel like we just need to have the James Franklin winning is hard to do. A lot of programs will like to be 1-0 each week. Like, we need to have that clip on a loop. And I think that would be like the perfect start to today's show.
Yeah, I feel like every time we do this podcast after a game, I am constantly saying this team is doing this team is doing that, and then whoever's a ranked higher comes back or whatever. Well, Alabama just lost to Vanderbilt, like fully lost to Vanderbilt, and that, my friends, is a massive upset, right? Like that is, I don't know, Bowling Green beating Penn State in some people's eyes, or Vanderbilt, admittedly, is probably like a top 60-ish team in the country. Alabama coming off a massive win over Georgia. But still, like, this is the kind of stuff that when James says that stuff and people like brush it off, like, this is just excuse making because the game was close. It's very real. College football is getting tenuous, and in that regard, I think the gap is shrinking between the best teams and the worst teams. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about, like, there's this top tier of teams with like Bama,
the upper
Georgia,
echelon,
Ohio State, like that's above everyone else. And after the last couple of weeks, I think I probably just believe that there's this like cluster of 15 teams at the top that is all around each other as teams that could win the national title this year. And I don't know about you, but I come away from today, and by the way, today is not over. Number 4, Tennessee is currently losing to Arkansas. Number 10, Michigan is currently losing to Washington. Number 11, USC is currently losing to Minnesota.
My Vols. Right?
Yes, your beloved Tennessee Volunteers. Cal plays number 8 Miami later tonight, and I have to think that Cal's got a chance in that one too. Like,
USC is going right now as we're recording.
Yeah, that was the one I said. Like, they're down 3-0 in Minnesota, and that's almost at the end of the first quarter already because nobody runs the clock like the Minnesota Golden Gophers. All of that is to say, I think I come away from today as a whole feeling better about Penn State's chances, not just to make the playoff, but potentially make a run.
I'm with you, John. And, here's the thing, right? Penn State, as you said earlier, beats UCLA 27-11. The one thing that I'm going to remember from this game, when we think back at the end of the season or in the doldrums of the offseason, probably the only thing I'm going to remember from this game was a block by Vega Lane. Like, that's it. Like, that is one of those things. And I think, too, it's important. I think the context of this win matters, too, in that Penn State didn't have Nick Singleton, right? The offense still, you put up 27 points. It was a slow start for sure. Penn State was held scoreless in the first quarter. Drew Allar even said it afterward. He said, on some of those, the first two drives, there are things they need to be sharper with. He pointed to a pass that he had to Julian Fleming where he said, hey, I need to get that ball up higher, hit him a little bit more in the chest. Again, far from perfect by any stretch, but you were without who I would say is your most, I'm going to say it, your most important piece on the offense. You're without Nick Singleton.
I think Tyler Warren's more important, but I think there's an argument either way, right? I think that is the top, right? Like, those two are the most important players. Probably Drew's probably in that group too, if we're being honest.
This is probably a good midweek argument we can have about this because I think and there's cases to be made for all these guys. Yeah.
But I think either way, your point has been made, right? Like, Nick Singleton is one of the team's best players. He's one of the most important offensive players, and he wasn't on the field when I think a lot of people expected him to be on the field, even after we didn't see him at practice Wednesday, expected him to be on the field, as I think both of us talked to people on Thursday and Friday. And then for everyone involved, this kind of came out of nowhere on Saturday that he didn't play. But before we get too far into this and too far into that discussion, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button. That really helps us out as we continue toward 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. But I think it caught a lot of people by surprise that Nick Singleton, after going through warmups and looking like and I think he was even announced as a starter, did not play in this game.
Here's the thing, and I just want to caution fans with this because I knew this was going to happen in terms of like he's going to get introduced as a starter, then he's not going to start, and people are going to be confused. there's always seemingly a disconnect between
Yes.
the video board, what they announce, and who actually starts. I don't know, like, how that happens. I'm not sure why they can't get that
I think
fixed.
my guess is, and I can try and reach out to some people about this because I'm curious about it too. I think they submit the video board stuff like way earlier than any real decision is made with guys that are game time decisions, or
Mhm.
in Nick's
Like,
case, like a
can't you
late
change it?
scratch, essentially. I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
really don't know. Like I don't know if they're just running a video on a loop up there that they have preset, or if
I
they're
mean, because
piecing it together. I really
well,
don't
then
know. And
because they
something worth
announced
asking about.
Zion Tracy as the punt returner, but then, like, technically Jake Spencer got the first punt
Yeah.
return. And I'm like, okay, but Caden Saunders is in a boot, and we can get on into all the injuries in here in a second because I do think that's important. But yeah, so I figured, I said, okay, they announced Singleton, but I don't even tweet that because I'm like, it means nothing because that's kind of how these things have panned out over time. But I watched him warm up. Again, I'm not a physician, as you can tell. Clearly, sports. That's not
Oh,
no MD
I thought
behind
those
me. Yeah,
degrees
no,
were
that's
for you being a doctor.
that's for secondary education and journalism. So two
Hmm.
very high paying industries.
Way
Not
less valuable.
yes, way less important, but number one in everyone's hearts, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
so I see that and I'm thinking, okay, Nick Singleton to my eyes looks good. Like looks like he's moving around pretty well. Again, it's warm ups. I don't know what's the issue, but James Franklin, the way he spoke afterward, said that he anticipated they were going to have Nick. He thought he was going to have him Thursday, thought he'd have him Friday, thought he'd have him right up until kick. So there was a decision that was made between warmups and when they took the field, and that's when it was like, okay, Kaytron's up. Even parsing through interviews after the game, like Drew Allar was asked, when did you find out that Nick wasn't going to go? And he was like, I never found that out. Like I just kind of was
Right.
out there. Kaytron was there. Um, John, again, with my non medical degrees, I'm going to take off my medical hat for a second here and put on my common sense hat. What I would take from this is that Penn State was being overly cautious with one of their best players. That Penn State went into this and said, hey, think about how many times Nick Singleton ran the ball, right, against Illinois. It was a very physical game. If you can limit the wear and tear on Nick Singleton ahead of USC next week, a game that you came into as what, a 28-point favorite or whatever it was,
27 and a half. Did
27
not
and a
cover.
half. Sorry. 27 and a half. Yes, I was on the field when they didn't cover, and I knew why the fans were like all groaning. I got it now. But it was to me like I think that's again my interpretation. That's just my interpretation of what I think maybe they were doing. Because again, for him to dress, warm up, go through those things, it was a little bit different.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about what I am comfortable divulging here. Uh, but I have
Come on,
heard.
John, we're all friends here.
Right, that's right. As Audrey casually sips a beer during the podcast. But I have heard maybe not conflicting things, but different things since
Mhm.
the game ended. I reached out to some people, several people, trying to kind of get the picture painted here of what this looks like, and it doesn't. I don't know. I think there is. I think one thing is clear, and that what is ailing Singleton is not a long term issue at all. I would be shocked if he doesn't play against USC. Genuinely shocked.
Mhm.
Um, I was fairly surprised he didn't play today, and
Same.
I would anticipate this probably being a non-issue moving forward. I don't want to say that that's definite, but I don't think it's going
Right.
to be an issue, even with regard to practice or anything like that. Like uh, I think what if I had to guess, we'll see Nick Singleton on the practice field Wednesday when we see practice, and we'll see him play against
I
USC.
won't see him Wednesday. I'll already be on my way to Los Angeles, but
That's very
you'll
true.
be there, eyes on the ground.
Yes, but yeah, I think this is, and this
Mhm.
can change. To be clear, like this is one of
Yeah,
those things. I actually, I did a pregame story with some notes in there and on over on SundayDaily.com saying like I expected to see Singleton play, like I had pre-written that and everything, and then obviously between us publishing that story and the game, like that's when the change sort of happened, right? As James told us
yeah.
today. So these things can change, but as of now, I wouldn't be overly concerned about anything there. But yeah, I think that I appreciate James being forthright about that as well, because I had kind of heard what he said in the post game presser, and he basically came out and said it that yeah, it was a very late decision. This was not something that they were anticipating earlier in the week. He said Thursday thought he was going to play. Friday he's going to thought he was going to play. Wednesday he told us that he didn't expect there to be any issue. A very strange situation, I think. But again, nothing that I think
Yeah,
merits looking into or thinking
no.
is anything long term.
And I do think, and again, part of this was like the panic coming out of Wednesday night from the fans. We saw it, we heard it, and then there were even things today. People saying, "Oh, is he trying to opt out for the rest of the season?" Like, no, it is not that. But I
Yeah,
think now in
and there
this era
is
of college football, people are their minds are gonna go crazy.
there's the other thing I saw was like people saying he had a stomach bug. Like that's not the case.
Hmm.
It's listen. I'll say this, and I'll just say this broadly. It is October 5th. It is flu season. People
Got my
get
flu shot yesterday.
yes, I need to get mine before I head out to Los Angeles. People get sick this time of year. That I'm sure there will be times this fall when we hear players with scratchy voices or that sound a little
Hmm.
congested. This was not a scenario where if he had any illness, there was anything keeping him out. There was no stomach bug. Like that is not. I have no reason to believe that is the case. To be clear, so yeah, I think what kept Nick Singleton out of this game was what James would call bumps
Bumps
and
and
bruises.
bruises. Yeah.
Yeah, but a short term injury essentially.
Hmm.
That is my phrasing, to be clear, not his, and it is not one that I think is. Frankly, I don't think anyone really thought it was going to affect this game, and I would be surprised if anyone thinks or that it does affect the next game.
I think what it did is that you see kind of what the offense looks like without Singleton, right? You're taking away one of your most explosive players. This was Penn State's like least effective ground game of the year. Got the numbers in front of me. Kaytron Allen, 21 carries, 78 yards with a touchdown. Quentin Martin, 1 carry for 1 yard. He did also have a couple receptions, I believe, for 18 yards, if I'm remembering.
And he was out
No,
there for
three
a good chunk of
catches. Three
snaps too.
catches. Yes, and I think the important piece to remember here is obviously you don't have Singleton, but you've been operating without Cam Wallace now for a couple weeks, who's out with a long-term injury. So Martin came into the year as your number 4 back, and now he's elevated to 2. So these were like really valuable reps for him. He also took Singleton's place as the kick returner. So again, you have that kind of that effect there. But yeah, the offense looked different because you didn't have one of your best players. But John, we saw some signs of life from Liam Clifford today, who had a good preseason, as we heard. First 100-yard game for Liam Clifford, 3 catches, 107 yards with a long of 57, which also was a career high for him. He was a bit of a third down magnet, which I think to me, what I take from this is, again, you want to see this consistency from the entire offense. But I think what I can say now is we've seen Harrison Wallace have his moments and do it. We now can say that we've seen Liam Clifford do it too. We've seen it consistently week in, week out from Tyler Warren. We've seen it from Amari Evans in spurts. James Franklin said, hey, this is another thing teams have to think about now that they have, some more weapons.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a ton, and I know this is going to sound strange talking
Mm-hmm.
about a player who had 107 receiving yards. I don't know that there's a major takeaway there. I think if you look at it right, he had 3 targets. This was not like he was open so
Right.
often that Drew Allar was throwing him the ball where he had like 9 catches for 107 yards and a touchdown, whatever. Like this was a 3 catch, 107-yard performance. It without the touchdowns reminded me of Keandre Lambert-Smith in the Rose Bowl a couple
I
years
knew
ago.
you were going to say
Uh,
that. I knew
well,
that.
but
Mhm.
I think that's
Yep.
the kind of game
It's a good example.
that people kind of not fall for, but like allow their opinions to be skewed by
Mhm.
just because like they have 2 big plays and suddenly it's like, oh, they're this massive dynamic receiver. It's like, listen, sometimes big plays get created by scheme and by offense. Not to say Liam isn't responsible for that. He's the one who got open on that 57-yard reception, but like I think this is more of that, right? Of the scheme at work here, where let's see, there were 5 players who had at least 3 targets. He was one of them. Trey Wallace had 3. Tyler Warren and Quentin Martin each had 4, and Julian Fleming had 5. They distributed the ball around as they have most of the season. I just think, and like I think this, if Trey Wallace is getting a deep ball and Liam Clifford catches, a 25-yard pass instead, that suddenly people are viewing the performance massively differently when I don't think it is. I just think it's where you're put in certain situations,
Mhm.
right? Like when you're a team that doesn't have a like Ryan Williams or Jeremiah Smith or Titterow,
which
McMillan,
is yeah.
or
Most
Luther
teams.
Burden. Like, right. Like,
Yeah.
those are the 4 best receivers in college football that I just listed off. 2 of them were freshmen, which is terrifying. But like,
Insane.
when you don't have those kind of guys, this is kind of more what it looks like. And so I think that's going to be the case with Penn State. We've mentioned before that we expect there to be games where like Fleming goes for 100. Trey Wallace, as you mentioned, already went for over 100. Like, I bet at some point that Fleming gets, that 100-yard game this year. I just think it's going to happen. It's more circumstantial than it's indicative of where who they are as a player or anything like that, right? Like, I think it has more to do with the circumstance. We know, frankly, with a lot of these guys, who they are as a player at this point,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Andy Kotelnicki has done a really good job of putting each of these players in positions to succeed. Some weeks, some will succeed more than others because of what he sees in the opposing defense, and I think this week was, and not to take away from Liam Clifford's performance, he did a good job today catching all 3 of his targets for 107 yards. But at the end of the day, it was a 3 targets. I don't know that this necessarily changes my outlook, and I'm going to come out of this game like, and I know you said he was a bit of a third down magnet today, and I think that is true, that today he had 3 crucial third down catches, but I don't think this is like,
this isn't your Tyler Warren,
or this isn't like, Victor Cruz or Julian Edelman, these short game merchants on third down who convert everything, right? Like, this is much closer to I think probably an outlier, and it's just circumstantial, as I said. I don't want to pour water on anyone's thoughts on this. This offense has 2 really awesome weapons in Trey Wallace and Tyler Warren out on the edges, and they have a bunch of really good complementary pieces, and I think that's a very good thing. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our good friends over at Roback. If you love Roback as much as we do, I'm sure you would love a great deal if it's your first time ordering over there. And you can head to roback.com and use code TND20. That's TND as in the Nittany Dispatch 20 to get 20% off your first order. And I got to tell you, Audrey, this is like the perfect example. Everything I'm wearing right now, right? Like, this is the performance hoodie. I have the hat on right now. Thursday and Friday, I golfed wearing performance polos to golf in. It was a little chilly the one day, so I threw a performance hoodie over top, and I had the performance joggers on while I was out there. It is Roback. Yes, this is my favorite gear. I wear it all the time.
John Sauber is brought to you by Roback. Like, that's all you need to know.
Pretty much.
If you see John at a game, if you see him out in the wild, there's a 95% chance he's wearing what he has on right now. And I mean that as a compliment, John.
Yes. And there's, the 10% chance that I'm wearing Phillies gear, but that's pretty much gone now. But yes, if you would like 20% off your first order over at roback.com, use code TND20. Now back to the show.
One of those potential complementary pieces I alluded to earlier with Caden Saunders was on the availability report as out, and he was on the sideline with his foot in a boot, which, again, MD tells me that's probably going to be something that we don't see him for maybe a little while when you're in a walking boot. Things change. Stuff happens. But that's kind of another one. You look at that and you say, okay, like, thinking about the health picture here, like, Saunders was someone that, where did I even get that from? I know where I was thinking, I'll get there in a second. He's somebody that you think about it and you say, okay, like, we thought maybe going to be a breakout year. Hasn't happened. He's had health issues so far, had an issue in the preseason. So curious to see what happens there. But Anthony Donko, we did not ask nor get an update from James Franklin after the game on this. This will be, I'm sure, a midweek thing that somebody you're going to keep an eye on at practice, ask about. He had exited, I believe it was in the first quarter, might have even been after that first or second series, came over to the sideline, and as soon as he came off the field, he was clutching his left shoulder and like was not really moving that arm. And I was watching him on the sideline, like trying to lift his arm up. It did not look like it was going well. Visibly was in pain. Training staff came over. They took him in the tent, came out of the tent, took the pads off. They put the pads back on and put like a harness on his shoulder, but he did not go back in the game. So Nolan Rucci got extended looks at right tackle. So again, like, good sign that he stayed on the sideline. Not a good sign that he didn't go back in necessarily. Now, again, it was still first quarter at that point, tight game. But I do wonder moving forward kind of what his availability might be.
Yeah, and one thing I think I can't remember if we said this midweek or not. I don't think we did, But a lot of these injury questions, we won't have answers
Mhm.
about them until Wednesday practice. James essentially said at his Monday press conference that he just like the turnaround is so quick from games to the Monday that he doesn't have, if it is long term, like he's not in a position to say that yet because he has to go through the channels and everything, like getting
He
approval
wants
from
to
families and all
tell
that stuff.
right, yep.
Yeah. And so we probably won't have clarity on any of that stuff until Wednesday. It's one of those things, honestly, we will be asking those questions pretty heavily on Wednesdays now, right? Like I think the Wednesday presser will probably turn into more of a status update presser, but that's the nature of the beast. If that's when he kind of wants those questions asked, then and if that's when we can get answers, then that's when we'll try to get those answers. The Donko
Mhm,
piece, so heading into this game, I would have said, you don't want to lose Anthony Donko. You don't want to lose any players to injury, but you would feel good about the depth behind him because Rucci was battling with him for that starting right tackle
mhm.
spot. After the game, I don't know if I still believe that's the case.
Yeah.
I was not overly impressed with how Nolan Rucci played. I thought he struggled with speed off the edge. I thought he struggled a little bit in the running game as well. He just plays so high. He's such a, he's
Big dude.
6'8", gigantic.
Mhm,
And I think that could be worth monitoring and a potentially more damaging loss, if it is one, if Donka has to miss any
mhm.
time, than maybe I would have anticipated, you know, 12 hours ago.
Right, there's a reason why the rep share has been what it's been, right? With Donko getting way more snaps. Again, this was an open competition in the summer. Donko kind of sealed the deal with it. Yeah, to me, this is definitely going to be a storyline this week. Something that, especially going into a game of this magnitude against USC, will absolutely be warranted. But yeah, I think you look at that and you say, okay, you didn't have Nick Singleton, but then you also lost your right tackle, and so you say, okay, well the rushing yards were down, the offensive productivity was down today. It was just kind of a weird game in that regard. Again, that's why I go back to the play of the game for me, John, is the Venga Wane block, putting him in motion from the slot. I mean, who among us doesn't want to see more of that?
Right. Like, and so I wrote about, this was sort of the lead to my story, but I think this is indicative of a lot of what this team's identity is, right? Like I wrote about how their identity this year, and I think it's been harder in the past to identify what a what specifically Penn State teams under James
Mhm,
Franklin, like what their identity is, like what they hang their hat on, so to speak. I think it's very clear that it's this combination of creativity and physicality, right? Like it's kind of a weird combination, right? You think of physicality. One of the things I wrote is like, this is not a physical team in the sense that they're going to go out there every snap with a fullback, two tight ends, and run it straight ahead every single play, running halfback dive, right? Like
mhm,
it's more nuanced than that. It's creative, right? Like Andy Kotelnicki is finding advantageous ways to do those things. But at its core, and like one of the tenets of this team is how physical it is in the trenches and on the outside, right? Tyler Warren mentioned to me today that one of the things that kind of got the sideline going was Trey Wallace running angry after the catch on one of
mhm.
his catches, right? Like, and how that kind of fired everybody up, and how the Ioane, you mentioned the block after the motion, like got everybody fired up, right? Kaytron running through contact, like gets everybody fired up. It's like this is something that this team really feeds off of, and I think it's very interesting because it's like this blend of like the old school, this is how you play football, run it down the throat. On defense, like you're worried about tackling and making hits and stuff like that. But with new school kind of strategy, right? The defense, they're kind of playing in a shell a little bit. Not totally in a shell, I shouldn't say that. They're playing back. They're allowing the offense to come to them. They're tackling. They're trying to get takeaways. They're trying to confuse the offense. But at the end of the day, like they're more okay with longer drives and waiting for the offense to make a mistake. And offensively, they're trying to put together longer drives, but doing it with creativity. And I just think it's this blend of old school and new school that I think is really fascinating. And frankly, a really job well done by Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen so far.
And that was the I talked to Vengo Wane after the game and was asking him about, the play and when did they put this in? And he said that they put this play in the spring, but obviously you have to be careful with repping this in practice because you're not gonna try and, come out and kill someone on your own team.
Well, they
Eh,
ran it against West Virginia, right? He went in motion against West
right,
Virginia.
right. And so we've seen it before, but what we didn't see was the viral reaction to what happened, right? And so that was the difference. And he said, which I thought was funny, because I was watching him obviously during the play. You see him come across the formation, you see him deliver this powerful pummeling block, then push the guy down again. And you just hear the crowd erupt. And then, you look and he's like celebrating. And I'm thinking, like, oh, this is like a big moment for him. Obviously, this is going to be like a moment, a viral moment. But the funny part was afterward, he was celebrating because he heard the crowd and thought they were celebrating because Penn State scored, but they didn't. It was an 8-yard run by Kaytron, but the crowd was cheering for him because of the block, which to me, that just screams, hey, UCLA, welcome to Big Ten football. Like, people are going to absolutely lose their minds when they see this. But his phone was blowing up after the game. He said in the locker room afterward, Andy Kotelnicki, some refer to him as Coach K, found him and came up to him and said, like, you did a great job. And he said to Andy, like, hey, no, thank you. Like, this was for you, kind of like from one offensive lineman to another. So I thought that was a very cool moment. Again, probably one of the few things that we will remember from this game in the larger context. Anything else, John, with the offense that we're I did want to mention this. James Franklin, because he lamented the slow start, and I did too. But Penn State only had the ball. I went back and looked at it. They only had the ball for like 4 minutes and maybe 53 seconds in that first quarter, because UCLA comes down the field with that long drive. Penn State gets the fourth down stop from Zakee Wheatley. And then it's kind of like, okay, they're struggling to move the ball a little bit. So you'd like to see Penn State next week. Got to come out and start better. But again, this to me was just a very weird day for the offense for injuries, limitations, all different kinds of things.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they were able to do enough to beat a bad UCLA team, but still to win that game without one of their best players. Listen, you got to win those games, and it is I understand fans being frustrated that Penn State's not like blowing the doors off anyone but Kent State to this point. But listen, you want more information about this team? We're going to get it next week, right? And we're going to get
whether you like it or not, it's coming. Next time you're in Beaver
games,
Stadium, this is it. This is the stretch run.
Their next 4 games, we're going to find out, and we're going to find out because there is a world where this team is 5-4. Like, I don't think it's going to be the case, but it is absolutely on the table. I mean, Washington currently, and I know by the time you listen to this, you'll know the result of the Washington-Michigan game, but they're up 14-7 on Michigan, right? Who we saw beat USC, who we saw beat Wisconsin, and like I just think it's a dangerous thing to go in overly confident, I guess, into this stretch of games if you're Penn State, and to go in feeling you've got it all fixed. But I think the good news is they don't seem to be feeling that way, right? They talk about corrections all the time. They talk about getting everything together
each week.
Yeah, and I think there's also an acknowledgement that this team is on some level not where it needs to be, or where it wants to be, and that it'll keep improving. But yeah, we are about to find out. This offense is going to be tested. USC's defense is better than we thought. Wisconsin is a good defense. Ohio State might have the best defense, non-Iowa division in the country. Washington, a different story. But those first 3 games, like, I think we're going to find out a lot about this offense and just what it can do.
I was looking at my calendar behind me to check because I keep messing up this date. Ohio State, November 2nd. Today, we're recording this. It's Saturday, October 5th. Buckle up for this month ahead. I mean, that's what, John, what you were saying with USC. Like, it has been interesting the way in which this schedule laid out. The fact that Penn State opens up at West Virginia, then they've been home, which means you and I have been home for the past month. I want to apologize for jinxing the Beaver Stadium playing surface. I wrote about it. I wrote about it this week, and kind of what a great job the folks behind the scenes were doing on the field. And I stand by that. But the challenge of 4 home games in 5 weeks was evident when you looked at that field today. It did not look good. I had a friend.
Slipped.
I'm going to be honest, John. I've never seen it look worse. And I had a friend text me during the first half and said, I'm watching the game on TV. What is going on? Did they run a horse race at Beaver Stadium within the past week? And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I totally jinxed the playing surface. But here's what you got to keep in mind. And I've got a full story up on this on The Athletic. This is a grass playing surface, right? It's Kentucky bluegrass. And the grounds crew folks who I spent a lot of time talking with this week, they go around and look at that field for divots, right? They were doing that after the night game against Illinois. So we're talking like 11 o'clock, midnight. They're looking for divots, trying to fix it. There is only so much you can realistically do. This field was resodded in May after the Luke Combs concert because they knew that with a concert and a beer expo, they were going to have to resod. I bring all of this up to say, keep this in mind when we talk about a Beaver Stadium renovation. The stadium is getting renovated. The playing surface, which is widely regarded as like one of the best in college football, what I did not know and what I learned this week was that it's still, according to the people who work there and are experts in this thing, it still has the same drainage system from when the stadium was moved to its current location in 1960, right? That it is, it's not a sand-based field, which when you're doing other events on the field, compaction, I've learned a lot this week. Like there are other things you have to keep into account. So I bring all of this up to say, I saw people's complaints about the field. I saw your tweets about it. I saw it in person. I saw it on TV. John almost slipped.
Yes.
It will look much better. Give it a month. When Ohio State comes to town, it'll be fine. But yeah, to me, that was like, ooh, this field was looking rough after a month.
Yeah, I think you really saw it on the sidelines where there's just a lot of like bystanders who are constantly moving around, walking during games and
The end
everything.
zones.
Yeah, I think it, like you said, there will be a month. There's a month to get that sort of rectified. I'm sure they will. But in the meantime, like there's only 2 football games for Penn State between now and Ohio State, which I think is notable. It feels like we are finally,
Wow. You
yeah,
sure, John? You sure we're not forgetting one? Yeah, I guess you're right.
yeah, we have finally arrived to like the pivot point for Penn State. It seems like this happens every year where there's, and obviously like non-conference is, filled with cupcakes and, but Penn State usually gets like a little bit of a slower start to the conference season, right? Like, other than years where Ohio State is like late September, like it feels like all of that stuff is usually late
Back
October.
ended.
Yeah, and this has arrived, right? Like we are going to learn a lot about this team over the next few weeks. I I like I don't think today changed my view of what this program is or what this team is or can be. I just like I'm excited to finally be at the point where maybe this is egotistical, but like I finally feel like there's going to be data worth changing my mind about potentially, right? Like it doesn't feel like even the Illinois game or the West Virginia game was like enough. Like it gave you some
Mhm.
thoughts about here or there, but the opponents don't feel like they're good enough for me to be like, okay, this is worth changing my mind about. But
Right.
now I feel like we're finally at the point where I can look at something and say, okay, depending on how the USC game goes and what it looks like, I can change my mind about this team.
And if you're James Franklin and you're trying to rally the troops ahead of the USC game, you're in the locker room. Before you break that huddle, you say, guys, you win today, you can change John Sauber's mind. And
That's
that's
right.
how you
That's
get him
right. That's
fired
what it's
up.
all about. That's what
That's,
more could you want on this planet?
I mean,
Uh,
I will say, I found this interesting when I was talking to Liam Clifford after the game. One of the things he said was that they want to be the best offense in the country. And I followed up and said, is that just like a competitive, like we want to be great, or like, do you guys actually believe this? And he said that this is like, that's the goal. They believe this, and that the wide receivers, which I had not heard this before, that when the wide receivers break their huddle, they break it on something like best in the country. And I said, I didn't know that. Like, when did this start? And he said, this started immediately after the Peach Bowl. That we knew like the narrative surrounding this team. We knew everything that Marcus Hagan's told them, like, this is it. Now, are they the best receiving core in the country? No. But the fact that there is belief that they're striving to something. I'll tell you, here's what I learned this week, John. And I knew this, but it solidified and reaffirmed, this is an offense with confidence. This is an offense that believes in the coordinator. I think we got some quotes this week that were pretty
can I
telling.
think? Can we reiterate? This is an offense that believes in the coordinator. Like I think
Yes.
that is. Go ahead and like
hmm
italicize it, underline it. Like this is an offense
Highlight
that
it.
believes in the coordinator.
I asked Jaywan Sider about it this week and just kind of what's it been like game planning and working with Andy. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, it's not like it's always fourth and inches, like you're not always uptight. To me, that tells us everything that I think we need to know about last year and this year and what's changed, right? Because the personnel hasn't drastically shifted, but the coaching staff has. And I think that
I think you
matters.
could
And
probably say that the coaching staff didn't shift, the
well,
coordinator changed. And James said at practice Wednesday too about Andy, he talked about how like he knows when to be serious and when to be fun,
mhm,
like that there's a good balance of that. And I think and this is purely me. This is my conjecture. I'm not no one said this to me. I'm not reporting this. But I think it's very clear that Mike Yurcich wasn't always the most fun guy to be around, right? Like he's an intense guy, and that I don't even know that that's a criticism. Like he really wants to win. He's an intense guy and believes in what he does, believes in his principles and his system. And when he's at work, when he's on that job, like he takes it very seriously. And I think a lot of people saw that and believe that too.
and I think when you're winning, right, it's easier for
Yeah.
those things to kind of, people to say, okay, yeah, sure, maybe that's his personality, that's his philosophy, whatever. But when you lose, I think that changes things, right? And that makes it maybe people start to question their buy-in, or they start to say, okay, maybe I don't respond to this, right? Like if you yell at John, maybe he shuts down. If you yell at me, I'm definitely going to shut down. Right? Like I think there's
Actually, yeah, I do not respond to it. I know this about myself. I think a lot of people know this about me. You definitely do. I do
yeah.
not respond to authority well. This has been the case for a very long time.
I was even just saying authority. I just say like if someone yells at you, right? Like how
Well, I mean that
personalities are different.
the coordinator is the
Mhm.
authority in this
Yeah, that's
situation, right?
that's true. Yeah,
He's your coach. He's
I
your
thought
quote
John
unquote
was. Yeah, we're
boss.
gonna get all kinds of stories. John is.
Philosophical, no.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, like I think people respond in different ways, and I think
Mhm.
there are a lot of guys on this offense who respond really well to what Andy does, right? The hard coaching, but the encouragement when it's necessary. Frankly, the empathy, right? Like that's I
Yeah,
think a lot of this is like
and I think it's kind
Andy
of goofy
Kotelnicki is like
too,
a
right?
yeah, but he's like at his core, like he's a teacher and he's empathetic and he's
Mhm.
understanding and for all the goofiness, the jokes, the seriousness when he has to be, the frustration, like all of it comes back to like he's really empathetic. And I think that has resonated with players. I think they feel heard. They feel like they aren't just like a piece of the offense. They're whoever they are, right? Like and I
He's
think
gonna
that
if you're
matters.
Bo Prabula, he's gonna find a role for you, right? Tyler Warren, he's gonna let you do different things. Venga, he's gonna put you out there and let you go take someone's head off, right? And that's gonna make you feel good because you feel like you're valued, right? And I think
Venga
that's
said that last week. Like I
yeah.
talked to him last
Mhm.
week, by the way, about I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Yeah, it was last
I think
week
it's awesome.
when
Yeah.
we spoke to Venga post game, and one of the things he said, I asked him about like when I wasn't talking about the motion, but like when your coordinator splits you out wide, right, and suddenly you're out there. Maybe it's Anthony Donk who said it. I'm be honest. I'm pretty sure it was Venga because I don't think it
I
was
think
midweek
I think
when
it
we
was
spoke
after
to
the game
Donk.
because we talked Donko midweek. Yeah.
Yeah, and, it makes you he said about how it makes you feel valued, right? Like, it makes you feel like, "Okay, my coach is trusting me to do this. Now I wanna have his back because he clearly has mine," right? Like, and this is true in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
When you have the buy-in of your players or worker whatever, like, you are going to be more successful when everyone's, like, pulling the rope in the same direction, and that's Andy Kotelnicki is really effective at getting everyone pulling in the same direction, and it creates a scenario where even when it's not going well, it's going fine, right? Like it doesn't kind of fall apart at the seams when it goes poorly. And you mentioned with Yurcich, like that kind of hardened style, like when it falls apart, it can really fall apart fast. I don't think that's the case with Kotelnicki. Like honestly, I don't think if they have a bad game against I don't know Wisconsin, I
Whoever.
don't think
Yeah.
it's going to impact Ohio State. If they have a bad game against Ohio State, I don't think it's going to impact Washington, right? Like I think they are far more likely now to be steady because Kotelnicki believes in what he's doing and he believes in his players and he believes in them on an individual level.
For me, what I've gone back to in my head a few times the last month maybe of this season. I keep thinking back to 2016 with Joe Moorhead and how it was like this refreshing, explosive offense, but everybody was happy and they were happy because they were winning, but they were also happy because of how they jived with the coordinator. And there was this belief that, okay, we don't care how many points we're down. We're going to go out there and like, we're going to put up a lot of points. We're a high scoring, high powered offense. Penn State is much closer to that, like that vibe, that mojo, than they've been at any point since then, right? Like that's what I take from it. And I even was thinking of this, and I have to go back and look. But if I'm recalling correctly, that offense in 16, I believe, one of our criticisms was that they might have started slow. It was either 16 or 17. They were kind of like a slowish offense, but then they would just turn it on. Um, which is kind of a little bit of what we've seen here. So maybe there's, again, I'm just
Yeah,
thinking in terms of like confidence, swag, buy-in. They are much closer to that group than they've ever been.
I couldn't tell you because I was a senior at Penn State when that team was existing.
Audrey's old.
So yeah, you pretty much got the point there.
That was God. That was year, I don't even know, 5 or 6 on the beat for me.
Eesh,
Yeah, it's been a time.
that's tough to hear.
I anything jump out, John, about the defense? We did see Dom DeLuca back today.
I think they have issues at linebacker, but like that's probably a midweek discussion.
And that's, I don't really think anything new either.
Yeah, but I think they have they need to play their best guys and keep them on the field the whole game. I think that can be pretty short and sweet and to the point. Not really other than I understand everyone's like frustrated. It seems like everyone gets really frustrated with Tom Allen early in games, and then they just settle in and kick ass for the next
it's like that first
minutes.
quarter where it's like, oh well, maybe they have you on the ropes, maybe and then they're fine.
Yeah, and I think they play. He plays what is sort of in vogue with defense. Anyways, I believe they do. They drop a lot, right? They're playing off a lot. They're kind of giving the offense something. With the part of the idea being eventually that quarterback's going to make a mistake, right? Eventually they're going to turn the ball over. Eventually they're going to fall behind the sticks, and that's when this defense will kind of activate, right? That's when the second they know you're passing, that's when the pass rush goes and gets them. Allen does a really good job of disguising coverages too. But I think that is a lot of this, right? It feels like, I'm sure fans feel the frustration of oh, they're dinking and dunking their way down the field, but it feels like every time the other team gets the 24-yard line, that drive stalls out. And suddenly you look up and they've given up 3 real points in the game. And I know some people will be scoff at James saying in his post-game presser that the defense only gave up 3 points. They really did. Their entire backups were in when they gave up that touchdown late. The game was well in hand. They gave up 3 points to the first team with their first team. And listen, that's worth noting, right? It is worth noting that this defense, despite it maybe feeling different for fans, is just as elite as it has been over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think that's you hit it spot on though with that early, the first quarter, and I even wrote about it this week on The Athletic. It seems like if there's one thing that people want to freak out about, it's that. And that's what I'm curious to see at USC. Okay, you're on the road. How do you respond in that opening quarter, right? What do you do? Does anything change? Special teams wise, we got into the return stuff earlier with Quentin Martin, with Zion Tracy, with Jake Spencer. Ryan Barker, I believe there's a new kicker in town. He connected on both field goals, 25-yarder, a 40-yarder, hit his extra points. James Franklin said after the game that he believed it was a 1 percentage point difference between Sanders Sahadak and Ryan Barker this preseason, which I know he had said early on. It was very close this preseason, so I think you have that. What I will say, John, and again, you and I are both doing this under the assumption that Nick Singleton's fine and that he's going to be back next week. If he isn't, again, that's not the expectation, but if he isn't, you're talking about a different kick returner. You're talking probably about a different punt returner, and you're talking about a different kicker than you had week 1. Just things now. Now you could also make the
I don't even know
if
it's worth
upgrades. I'm just putting it out there, just food for thought for the week. Just as people are kind of grinding through their week, they're thinking about all these different things.
You're stressing them out. You're stressing everybody out. Listen, when there is reason to be concerned, we will tell you with Nick Singleton. I'm just throwing it out there. I just want to make sure we continue to clarify that. But yeah, no, I think we have covered most everything here. It is funny. We always talk about the player we're going to talk about right away in the post game, and it happens to be someone who didn't really play in the game, and Nick Singleton, which is not what I think either of us predicted here.
Who did I pick? I don't even remember.
I picked Denai Dennis Sutton, and I got.
Oh no, I did pick Singleton. You're right. That was me. That was me.
Denai Dennis Sutton was a monster out there against UCLA. I felt bad for those poor tackles going, because you can tell he kind of turns into a different person on the field. It's kind of scary.
There's a next level mentally, I think, with him that he clicks into.
Yes.
I just was pulling up this tweet when you were talking, John, because I saw this Friday night. he had tweeted, Deny Dennis Sutton tweeted, God, please watch over me. As for tomorrow, I show what Deny Dennis Sutton is capable of.
Like,
I think he did.
That's the kind of tweet that if I were the opposing tackle, and I saw
Yeah.
that, I would
Pray for
be
me.
hurt. I would be like, what injury do I have to come up with to not have to deal with this tomorrow? Because that is like a man who is going to a dark place mentally to get, not even a dark place, but to a deep place mentally to kind of turn into what he is on the field. And listen, Deny Dennis Sutton's one of the best defensive ends in the country. I still think he's a very worthy first round pick in this upcoming draft if he decides to leave. And yeah, he was ridiculous out there.
And he still has it. His pinned tweet is still, I will be the best defensive end in college football, which is from March 8th, 2022. And he's been asked about this several times since then. And every time he doubles down on it, which I love.
Yeah.
He's a very fun interview. I went to his high school way back in the day when he was being recruited. He's always been really interesting guy. And so, yeah, I think honestly, I would not be stunned, John, if you and I are having this conversation next week with beautiful weather in Southern California, and we're talking about Deny Dennis Sutton making a play that changes the trajectory of this game or that greatly alters the game because he's got that kind of ability.
Well, and especially because I talked about those situations where the other team's going to throw the ball. You mostly know USC is going to throw the ball.
Yeah.
But they do get it out quick, which will make it interesting too. How much Lincoln Riley just keeps taking the 4 to 7 yards that Tom Allen's given him. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. Of course, all of that is a discussion for next week.
I can't wait, John. We're going to have a fun week.
We are, and you are going to be somewhere else when we record next week's episode.
I am flying out Wednesday, flying into San Diego, and then working on some stories there, kind of weaving my way toward LA. I will be in LA by Friday, and hit us with your recommendations.
Yes.
Preferably your beach bars for me, because John doesn't strike me as a beach bar guy, but I could be wrong.
Any bar is fine.
Yeah,
any bar.
Any bar. There probably will be baseball going on, but both of us are done with that sport at this point as we record this. We're mentally, emotionally.
We are 45 minutes and 40 seconds in, and I just had to watch that game. And you're going to bring it up now? Shameful, Audrey.
For all of our listeners, this is how much John values you, because I said, hey, let me know when you want to record, when you're recovered. And he goes, I will peel myself off the floor and we can record. That's dedication.
To be clear, that is the exact phrasing. That's the exact phrasing that I used, and that is what I had to do after the Phillies just continue to rip my heart out of my chest. So that's a lot of fun for me.
A lot of games still to play, John. It can turn around. It can turn. I've never jinxed anything. Just ask the Beaver Stadium grass.
Right. Or I've never jinxed anything. Ask all of the poor fans listening to this, listen to me talk about Penn State destroying Illinois and UCLA, and both those games not resulting in Penn State covering the spread. So that's my bad, everybody. But yes, any recommendations you have for next week? Seems like I'm probably going to be free on Sunday night after I had some plans to maybe go to a baseball game, which is a real bummer. But any recommendations for Los Angeles would be appreciated. We will have you covered all week and at the game next week in Los Angeles. We are going to hopefully record Wednesday, I think, depending on when Audrey's in San Diego.
Because I should land Wednesday, hopefully do some reporting Wednesday night.
Maybe I'll even Thursday.
Okay, so maybe I'll find a nice backdrop so everybody thinks they're in California with us, and it's nice.
That's right. With half of us, as I have this nice gray background with you can't see it, but over here is a frame story of mine that I did a few years ago. So yes, we will have all of that next week. I'm looking forward to it. Listen, the season started a month ago, but feels like this season really starts this week. And this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot, and we will be here to take you along through it and to hopefully help guide you and help you either celebrate if you would like or cope if you would like. We will be the sort of narrators to what's going on, if you will. But until then, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It helps us out if you give those 5-star podcast reviews on Apple Podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button as well. If you want to follow Audrey on Twitter, find her at Aud Snyder. Find me at John Sauber. Read Audrey over at The Athletic. You can read me at centerdaily.com. That's CENTRE, like the county, not the word. But until midweek at some point this week, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.